أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back, viewers, to Islamic Oasis Live. Alhamdulillah, today we have Brother Adnan Khan, the founder of the Geopolitical website, a website and a journalist media source which is dedicated to covering current events throughout the world. We recommend that you guys check out the website. You can search up the Geopolitical. Alhamdulillah, Brother Adnan Khan is back with us today after meeting with us at the conference which we had recently at here at Oasis, which was on Islam and the Subcontinent. Now, the topic we're going to be talking about today is regarding India. It's about the subcontinent. It's about the potential of India as a significant power on the global stage. Of course, India has that legacy that it was a major nation, a major power. India, before it was India, when it was called Hindustan, some 200 or previously before 200 years, when it was administered by the Mughals, the Mughal Empire. SubhanAllah, this region has such a great contribution to the world, to civilization, has such an amazing culture, amazing economic output, ability that it can produce in terms of luxury goods. And of course, it was a bastion for Islam on the world stage. First of all, Brother Adnan Khan, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan for coming back on our platform. How are you doing?
Barakallah fi. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. It's good to be here again.
So, Brother Adnan Khan, can you tell us a little bit about India, about this presentation that you have here?
Okay, so as you mentioned, the title of your recent conference was about the subcontinent, and the underlying theme of my presentation, which I'll go through now, inshallah, is throughout history, even today, and even going forward, the subcontinent has always attracted the attention of other powers. And you mentioned some of the reasons in your introduction, but the subcontinent has never reduced in importance. It was important in the past. The Mongols saw it as a very important region. Europeans couldn't get enough of the region. During the Cold War, it was a very important region. And today, America and China have both got their eyes on it. And even going forward, is going to remain important. So my presentation really is about, let's break this down. Let's have a look at this. Let's look at why and how can the people of the region take their destiny into their own hands and they actually benefit from the importance of the region. Throughout history, other powers have seen the region as important and they've wanted to use it for their own objectives. How can the region become independent? How can the people be confident that they are in a very important region? And then how can they make use of these strengths and these advantages? And actually, for once, take advantage of how important this region is for the benefit of the indigenous people and the region itself.
Khair, inshallah. At this point, I guess let's begin with the PowerPoint. I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. So when the
British came to the subcontinent, this was in the early 1600s. They came to this region and they couldn't believe what they witnessed. They couldn't believe their eyes from what they were seeing. And just for a bit of context, you have to remember the British came from a continent that's frozen for about 6-7 months a year. It's pretty cold for the remainder of the year as well. And they came to this region and they just couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Eventually, the directors of the East India Company, they managed to get an audience with Jahangir. Now, Jahangir, if I remember, was probably the third or fourth leader of the Mughal Empire. And what these directors said is the European monarchies could only dream to live in the splendor that the Mughals lived in. That's how they described the region. This was the richest place in the world. In fact, for almost all of history, China and India had the world's largest population. So they were, for more or less all of history, the richest countries in the world. So what was the reality of the region when the Brits arrived that led to them actually saying this? Well, as I mentioned, for most of history, as this chart shows you, the Chinese and the Indians were the largest, the richest region in the world. They're the largest GDPs. In fact, in the 1700s, the Mughals were 27% of the global economy. So they were literally even larger than the whole of Europe combined. That was the situation when they arrived. Now, this is how one British official, he described what he witnessed. So he mentioned that nearly every kind of product was manufactured in India. So every kind of creation of man's brain and hand that exists everywhere in the world had long been produced in India. India was far greater industrial manufacturing nation than any other in Europe or in Asia. Her textile goods were world-renowned around the world. Jewelry was so exquisite that people could only dream of such gems. And gold, silver, metal, iron, all of this was made, produced, and converted into all sorts of materials. India had some of the best architecture in the world, equal in beauty to any other nation in the world. And also, it was one of the greatest shipbuilding nations in the world as well. This is how one British official actually described what they were seeing at the time. Now, this was what the Mughal Empire looked like in the 1700s. So it's literally the size of a whole continent. And this area to the right is Bengal. Now, Bengal at the time, it was the textile capital of the world. And in fact, it had actually been the textile capital of the world for centuries. So for centuries, the handloom weavers of Bengal have produced some of the world's most desirable fabrics, especially the fine muslins, which were light as woven air, which were coveted by European dressmakers, and which all the princesses and the princes also wanted as well. In fact, there's actually evidence, documentary evidence, that Roman manufacturers used to complain that they couldn't compete with the textiles that was coming out of Bengal. Now, at the time, the Europeans, they were used to easy military victories of other peoples. When they came to India, the Europeans had already colonized North and South America. They were trying to colonize the rest of Asia. So when they came to India, they were actually quite used to military victories over other peoples. They were industrializing at the time as well. But despite that, the British realized very, very quickly that they can't do this with the great Mughals, because the Mughals kept under arms a staggering number of armed personnel. They had an army of 4 million people. And that was bigger than some of the countries at the time as well. So economically, this region was 27% of the global economy. It produced everything, and it had a standing army that nobody could really compete with at the time. So the subcontinent, it always has attracted the attention of global powers because of its resources, because of its wealth. Throughout history, is attracting the attention of other powers. So the Mongols, they saw the region's immense wealth, trade routes, and valuable resources, and they wanted a piece of the pie as well. But despite several attempts, they were defeated by the Delhi Sultanate, so they were unable to really gain any foothold in the subcontinent. Then we know the Europeans came, so the British came, the French came, the Dutch came, the Portuguese, the Danish, and the Austrian, they all came, and they set up operations, and eventually they began ruling over territories. So as we know, the British got the lion's share of territory, and they were able to maneuver where they basically became the rulers for a period of 300 years. After World War II, the Cold War began, and again, the Soviet Union had its eyes on the region, and the capitalist world, America, who was their leader, also had their eyes on the region as well. So both countries and blocs competed for influence over the subcontinent. And then we see today that China and America have their eyes on this region. So what this really shows you is nothing's really changed throughout the centuries. This region was always important. Powers from outside the region wanted to use it for their strategic objectives, and that really continues today, and it will continue going forward in the future. So what makes this region important today? Why is it still, after centuries, there's such a big demand to ensure this region is in their team rather than in the other team? And there's a number of reasons for this. If you look at this map, the subcontinent in many ways is in the center of the world. You can see here, it links to many other regions. It links to the Middle East, it links to Central Asia, it links to the Far East, and it links to China as well. So if you control this region and you are able to establish yourself and set up a base there, it's giving you access to the three key regions of the world. The other thing that makes this region very important is human capital. So I've got this pie chart in front of you, and it divides the world up by a region. And as you can see, South Asia is 25% of the world population today. And throughout history, it was actually the largest populated place in the world as well. So the human capital possibilities here are actually endless. This chart looks at the Muslim population by region, and whilst Islam was born and took its birth in the Middle East, today 36% of the Muslims worldwide reside in South Asia. So it's no wonder that this region, when partition happened, they wanted to establish Islam. Islam has a millennia-long history here, and it was only natural when partition was happening, they wanted to make sure Islam was a key part of the region. Even today, India has 200 million Muslims and a population of 1.4 billion, and 200 million are Muslim. That's a minority actually in India. You think 200 million is a large population. So Pakistan has a population of 248 million, which is completely Muslim, and then Bangladesh has 172 million as well. So this region is still one of the largest populated regions in the world, and it also has the largest Muslim population as well. And finally, this region also has nuclear weapons. You have two nations in the region that have nuclear weapons, which is quite unique because Europe is the only other region that has multiple nuclear powers. So when you put this all together, large population, large Muslim population, the location, the fact that it's linked to other strategic regions and nuclear weapons, it makes this region really, really important, and it will continue being really, really important. So as a result of this, what you find is in order to maintain influence, many myths have been constructed about this region. And I want to go for a few of these because these myths still remain a major obstacle for the region to become independent, for the people to take their own destiny into their own hands and move forward. In fact, when you look at this region, you tend to only hear negative things. So what you hear, for example, is that the region is divided, there's no unity. So how can the region ever work together? The subcontinent today is composed of multiple regions, multiple countries. So Pakistan, India, Bangladesh make up the vast majority. But it's important to understand that this was not the history of the region. These nations are relatively recent developments, and even they are British-created entities. And they were created, the region was partitioned to serve their objectives. So for almost all of history, there was no Durand line. There was no Pakistan-Afghanistan borders. This was created for a reason. So by dividing the region, it had a knock-on effect. So there are so many rivers and lakes in this region that start in one country, go to the other. So now they have to make treaties, they have to make agreements in order for them to distribute the water efficiently and justly. And this leads to all sorts of issues. Pakistan's agricultural breadbasket is Punjab, and India's agricultural breadbasket is Punjab as well. But there's a border in the middle of these two territories. So whilst in the past, they used the water that goes through them to develop the region agriculturally, today that region is divided. And in the past, when there was no borders, what you found is one region could contribute towards the rest of the country. So the Bengal region historically made textiles. The Punjab region in both Pakistan and India, it made agriculture to feed the population. You had the southern areas, they had a bustling trade network with sailors that used to go by. So the division that we have today is a manufactured reality. It's not the natural reality of the region. And what we also find is these new nations that were created, or nationalism, it's actually made things worse. So Pakistan was created in the name of Islam. So Muslims come and reside there. But in 1971, Bangladesh separated, East Pakistan separated from West Pakistan. We see for the last 2 decades, Pakistan sided with America against Afghanistan, even though America is the foreigner, and Afghanistan and Pakistan are in the region. So nationalism has actually divided the region, which aids external powers rather than actually helps the region. The second myth you get is poverty, that this territory is just poor. So you need investment, you need foreign direct investment, and you need the West to come and help you develop. And the statistics don't read pretty. India, despite being the 5th largest economy in the world, has 81% of its population living in poverty. Pakistan has 84% living in poverty, and Bangladesh has 74% living in poverty. So the majority of the population live under the poverty line. But much of this poverty is actually man-made. So if you look at the region is full of mineral wealth and resources, but because this is not distributed effectively, due to corruption as well, you find that this region can't take advantage of its strengths. So just to give you an example of the strength this region has, the largest untapped coal reserves in the world are in the Thar region in Pakistan. So despite electricity blackouts, despite load shedding, this country has the largest untapped coal reserves in the world. India is today one of the largest agricultural producers in the world. I think after China, it's the largest agricultural producer in the world. Despite that, majority of its population is in poverty. And Bangladesh, after China, is also still the largest textile producer after China in the world. So these countries are already leaders in a number of sectors, but that hasn't filtered down to the people and improved their lives. So this region isn't actually poor. In reality, it has resources more than the other countries that are powerful in the world, but unfortunately, they're not used for the benefit of the people. And the final one is Islam. When people look at this region, it's got the largest Muslim population of any region in the world. And what people see is lots of extremism. They see lots of terrorism. They see lots of sectarianism, Sunni Shia or ethnic tensions. And also what you hear regularly is this region has had a very violent history where Muslims killed Hindus and Hindus killed Muslims. Now, when we look at this, a lot of things in this region are called terrorism, when in fact what you find is in one time they're called something, and in another time they're called something else. A lot of the terrorism in this region, what you find is either state-sponsored or what you find is because people are being neglected and they've risen up, the state has then sent the army in, and as a result, the tribes and its ethnicities fight back. And then a lot of times to malign them, the regime in the region, they call these terrorist attacks. The Sunni Shia sectarianism has been used by various governments in the region for the benefit of the elites. So this is not something that's natural to the region. In fact, what you find is these problems are actually created to maintain the status quo. Even we see that there's ethnic differences in Afghanistan, which has nothing to do with Islam. Many of the ethnic issues in Afghanistan, they have nothing to do with Islam, but they get labeled as Islamic. And this is presented that Islam is actually a problem in the region. Regarding Islam's violent history, we have to keep in mind that Hindus were killing each other before Islam came. Hindus continued killing each other when Islam was there, and they've continued after Islam's reduced or disappeared. Hindus cannot agree on their gods, on their languages, and even their books. This existed well before Islam and actually has nothing to do with Islam. What Islam did is, when partition happened in 1947, 80% of the region were Hindus. So if Muslims had been killing Hindus for a millennia, then how is it that Muslims remained a minority and the Hindus are a large majority? What you find is rather than killing Hindus or massacring people, what Muslims and the indigenous population were doing was turning this region into the richest region in the world and making it 27% of the global economy. Islam actually turned this region into a global hub. Now, looking forward, this region has many advantages, and these will remain, and this will attract the attention of the world's powers. Today, this region is important for both China and America. They want to win it, and they want to use this region for their objectives. So the US wants this region to be a bulwark against China. It wants it to be part of America's containment strategy. And China wants to use this region for economic reasons, and also because India and China have quite a they have a history where they went to war with each other. So this region is in the middle of so many key other regions. So Central Asian energy, how do you get that to the world? Well, the West doesn't want it to go through Russia. So it needs to go through the subcontinent to the ocean and to the international markets. So that makes the region really, really important going forward. Human capital. The secret to China's economic development was that in 1979, when it did its open and reform era, it realized that its strategic advantage is the fact that it has an unlimited supply of workers. It has the largest population in the world, so it's got unlimited supply of workers. Therefore, it can produce anything cheaper than anyone in the world. So China's population, rather than being a problem, was then seen as an advantage. This region has over 1.4 billion people. So this region has a huge potential to change its situation. In fact, like China did, this region can become a low-cost manufacturer of the world because it has an unlimited supply of workers. So this region actually has loads of advantages. And finally, I want to mention that the global order that America established after World War II, it's changing. And now you're seeing the rise of China, and you're seeing a bloc emerge with Russia. And really, there's a debate that this region right in the middle of the battle between the East and the West. So historically, this region has always sided with one faction over the other. But really, what it needs to do is forge its own future. It has all the advantages. It has all the strengths. History has shown the world powers want to use it. So the indigenous people should stand on their own feet and become independent and shape the world and tell other people how to live rather than being told how to live. So this region needs to stop being a lackey for the other powers. This region needs to have its own destiny. It needs to stand on its own feet as it did previously as well. For centuries, the whole world flocked to this region. Yeah, and there was a reason for that, because this region had agriculture, it had wealth, it had manufacturing, it had everything. And it was Islam that unified the region and turned it into a global superpower. So this is the role Islam played, and this is the role Islam can, inshallah, play going forward. And inshallah, I'll end there then.
It's very interesting that's like UK, it started as like this. I mean, UK was always, obviously, geographically, it's always just like an island out on the even far away from the European subcontinent itself. But it's able to leverage its strengths to become a major power. So, I mean, I'm kind of naive a little bit when it comes to geopolitics as a field of study. But I really, when I see stories like this, when I think about like things like Britain's rise to power, or so many countless nations that you would have thought that they were insignificant on a global stage, that eventually over the course of like even 20, 50 years, they reverse their situation and they're able to like play to their strengths, that they can become like, you know, a major power in this region, basically call the shots in it. With something as huge as India, you know, there's no reason to think that it couldn't like be a significant actor on the world stage again. Of course, there's so many other factors that are there today. Like, you know, obviously when Britain, to go back to that example, there's so many reasons as to why like it grew and it had like a global empire at that time. There's a lot of factors that led to the, like, you know, the state becoming so much more powerful. And today we have like we have to take into consideration all the factors that are there today. I mean, we're living in a globalized world, and people are very like I mean, they're able to communicate with one another, but I guess like the most significant aspect would be that there is like a global hegemony that is there, which is like basically its military reach can go across the entire world. And of course, I'm talking about like America. It's setting like the framework, the skeleton for a global order, and it's been like that for a long time. So I'm kind of rambling here, but you know,
I was waiting for your question.
Given these circumstances, what's future do you see for India? I mean, should we be kind of like skeptical? Can we be optimistic? How do you feel about it?
Look, as my presentation showed, this region, if we call it India, so you know, historic India, it's always been important. It remains important, and it will be important going forward. So that shows you that people who are not from this region, how they view it. They view it as a strategic region. They view it as a region they want on their side. Currently, there's effectively a battle taking place between China, Russia on one side, and America and the West on the other side, who both want this region to be in their team. Because if this region is in the other team, it gives a massive advantage to whichever team wins it. So that shows you how they view it, and they're the global powers. So what that means is the people of the region should be confident that they can stand on their own feet independent. Why, if this region is so important, why is this region not shaping the world? Why is, as you mentioned, a small island on the edge of Europe? Why did it come and dominate this particular region? So it shows you that this region can stand on its own feet. Obviously, unfortunately, when the British came over, you know, to ensure there was no uprising, they created all the narratives. You know, you're uneducated, you're poor, you need us, we've come here for your benefit, you need democracy, you need to liberalize. And these were the people that were left in power. These were the families that were left in power. And they still articulate these arguments. So the fact that America keeps coming back, the fact that China has its eyes in the region, shows you really this region, it can become independent, and it can stand on its own feet. And so then it can dictate to the world how they should live. And remember, this region really, it was Islam, it was Muslims who made it the richest place on earth. It was always a rich place, but we don't talk about the Hindu-dominated India. We don't talk about the Hindu past and how rich it was. What you find is Muslims came here, and yes, Muslims weren't indigenous originally to the region, but Muslims didn't come here to rape the region like others did. Muslims came here to India, they made it their own, and they contributed towards its development. When the Muslims came to this region, the Hindus were fighting each other. They still fight each other. They can't agree on their gods. They can't agree on how to pray. They can't agree on their languages. Muslims came, ruled over them, and they made it their own. And that's why when the British came after 1600, they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. They just the marvel, just the manufacturing, the wealth, the richness, the way people were living. This was like beyond their wildest dreams. Like they came from cold Europe. Europe is a region that's frozen for around 6-7 months of the year. They came here and there was manufacturing going on, there was textiles going on, there was richness going on. And then when they saw the Mughal rulers, the monarchies in Europe didn't even come close to them. This was what the region actually was. So this region can stand on its own feet. The fact that the West keep coming back shows you it's important. Obviously, they need the people to think that without the West, you can't survive. Without us, there's nothing. And unfortunately, many of the intellectuals in the region, they advocate this. They believe the more the West is involved, the more close we are to the West, the better it is. Just look at Africa. You know, Africa was colonized. It was very close to the West. Europeans ran this continent. Look at the state of that continent today. In fact, you find everywhere where the West is invited or everywhere the West comes, even uninvited, they get raped, basically. And I remember there's a Congress MP, he said the British, when they came to the richest part of the world. When they left, they made India a poster child of poverty. So absolutely, this region can stand on its own feet. It has in the past. And the fact that the world is still interested in it today shows you that it has strength and it has advantages.
Yeah, subhanAllah. And it's like today we see the rise of kind of like Indian Hindu kind of like fascism, basically, in the modern era, where it's like you mentioned, I mean, obviously Indians had been in, or Muslims had been in this area in Hindustan for like a while. But it's kind of interesting. I was listening to a speaker, he was talking about Mughal history. Before the Mughals, roughly the population of Muslims in the subcontinent, you could say, is like 5%. Then over the course of the Mughals, even though they've settled in India, I mean, they settled there. And there was incredible efforts to basically to manage the population, to give da'wah and to promote the sciences, which over the course of their rule, by the end of it, basically it was like you had 40% of the population of subcontinent had accepted Islam. So, and during this time as well, and this is where Islam is expanding so much, you have Islamic government that is there. You don't see that there's this kind of religious violence, sectarianism that happened mostly after the colonial period, and it's continuing today, even under Modi, for example. I guess what I'm trying to say is we should really we have a lot to benefit from looking at Islam as kind of a general system, and meaning that it can manage this different ways of life as well. Obviously, Muslims are going to be applying the Sharia, right? But Sharia is not just a system where it's just basically the Muslims will constantly be lording over the others. It's a system where the people have justice. They have their own they're able to preserve their ways of life. Of course, we want them to accept Islam, but wherever you look in the Muslim world, whether it's Egypt, or you go to Palestine, or you go to Hindustan, the Muslims are able to accommodate these and manage these different groups of people in an effective way. And, that's an important thing to consider as well, looking forward as kind of a vision for Hindustan.
Our history in India, it's just another example, and there's many examples of this, where we Muslims were a minority and we ruled over majority non-Muslims. So we have a lot of experience in this, where we're a minority ruling over majority non-Muslims. It happened in Europe. The Ottomans, for most of their history, were a minority ruling over majority non-Muslims. Yeah. In India, we were never a majority. In fact, most of the time we were a minority. And that's why even when partition happened, one of the challenges with partition was 80% of the population was Hindu. So their view was, we get the lion's share of the country. And the reason why there were 80% of the country was because we didn't carry out a genocide. in our millennia that we were there. We didn't carry out a massacre. So we have a lot of experience and history of ruling over people who don't believe in our deen. Islam, it didn't come for just Muslims, it came for the whole of mankind. And this is completely different to if you look at the BJP, you look at the Hindu nationalists today. They have no idea how to rule over people who don't believe in Hinduism. Their views are you're born and you fit into one of the castes that they have. And there's no social mobility. You are stuck for the rest of your life in that caste system. And if you don't even believe in that in their deen, they view you as a second-class citizen, and we can do what we want with you. And this is the problem. That's what they're trying to do now. That's why even when Islam first came, this is what they were doing. They were enforcing the caste system on different Hindus, and they all used to fight each other. So there's a lot of literature now that Muslims used to fight Hindus. Hindus were fighting amongst each other before Islam came. They continued fighting when Islam came, and they continued fighting after that. And yeah, there were tensions. But when you're looking over a millennia period, there's no way. It's funny, if Muslims and Hindus were too busy fighting each other, how did they become 27% of the global economy?
Yeah. So
when you got violence, when you got instability, you don't get economic growth, you don't get development. The opposite actually happens. So what you find is, a lot of this literature, you've got to keep in mind that when partition happened, there were some right-wing Hindu nationalists who were impressed with Nazi ideas of superiority. And they weren't happy that Congress were negotiating with the Muslim League. They were unhappy that why are Hindus, when we are the majority, sitting down with Muslims to decide the future of the country? Their view was, we're a majority, we should impose our will on them. So that's why it was a Hindu nationalist right-wing fanatic who ended up killing Gandhi in there, because this is what they were really unhappy about. But these right-wingers have always been on the sidelines until now, until after all these decades via the BJP. But the BJP really is a coalition of right-wing Hindu nationalist parties. But now they've got into power now they're trying to impose this way of life on the whole country. And that's not our experience. You look at the Middle East, you look at the Far East, you look at the Ottomans. Most of our history, we were ruling over a non-Muslim. So, we have a very long history in this region. The documentary evidence is out there, what Muslims did to this region in terms of making it the richest place on the earth. And what's really funny is the 300 years of British rule, these Hindu nationalists like to just airbrush. So for some reason, they have a problem with the Arabs that came, the Muslims that came, but they seem to have a close affinity to the British, even though the British effectively raped this continent. That's what they did. How was it when the British left, this country was only 3% of the global economy, whilst when they arrived, it was 27% of the global economy? But clearly, you can see there who raped the continent and who actually made the continent their own and actually contributed towards it. And that's why Muslims have been here for a long time. They will stay here, and Hindus and Muslims have lived side by side together. I mean, I've got elements of my family that just a few generations ago they were Hindus. Yeah, and this is quite common in a lot of families. Hindus, Sikhs, all the different. We live side by side together, and not just in this region. We have a whole history in the Balkans, in the Far East, where Muslims live side by side with non-Muslims. So, what I've covered today in my presentation about a subcontinent, this is really just one snapshot of our full Islamic history. Because there's a lot of stuff that happened in the subcontinent that also happened in other places, in terms of rule, in terms of development, in terms of solving societal issues. And what I've covered today about the subcontinent is just really one example amongst many other examples of our history.
Inshallah, that snapshot will be the spark inspiration for us to look back and gain lessons from our legacy to move forward into the future. So Jazakallah khairan, Adnan Khan, for coming on again. To all of you that are viewing at home, Jazakallah khairan for tuning in. Inshallah, we'll catch you next week on Islamic Oasis Live. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام، نحن فينا عمر، لا 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 لن يطول الظلام، ديننا لن يضام، نحن جيل الهمام، نحن فينا عمر. صبح بدا نور ظهر، نجم وشمس وقمر، ألقى على الدنيا الدرر، هذا عمر هذا عمر. كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر، كي تستفيد من العبر، هذا عمر هذا عمر. لا لن تدوم الجراح، بل سيأتي الصباح، نحن أهل الكفاح،